In this short video, we're going to look at how to interpret sands and sandstones, carbonate rocks and sediments, and clays and shales. When we classify sands and sandstones, it's classified based on the composition of the grains. The grains can be quartz, feldspar, or other rock fragments. Here are the major types of sandstone. There's quartz sandstone, arcosic sandstone, greywacke, and lithic sandstone. The minerals that are found in the sands and the sandstone provide great information on weathering and erosion of the sand grains. If there is intense chemical and physical weathering and lots of erosion, meaning lots of transportation, this produces sandstones that are dominated by quartz, a very stable mineral at the Earth's surface. Feldspars and ferromagnesium silicates are easily weathered at the Earth's surface, or at least easier than quartz is. So if you find sandstones with abundant feldspars and ferromagnesium minerals, this indicates that there has been relatively little weathering and transport that's happened. So here's what a quartz sandstone tells us. It means that it has been in a depositional basin for a long time. It was deposited in a tectonically stable setting, and it was deposited in relatively shallow water environments. When we see arcosic sandstones, we know that this material spent a short time in the depositional basin, because if it had spent longer time in it, it would have been more weathered. This is also probably an area that there was an arid or dry climate. There is also probably a lot of tectonic activity and rapid erosion. Remember that greywacke is a sandstone that is composed of about 30% dark, fine-grained matrix. Greywackes are interpreted as being located in tectonically active source areas. This is also an area. The environmental interpretation of greywacke is that there was rapid erosion in a tectonically active area. Notice the greywacke deposited on the continental rise as a part of a turbidity current. Lithic sandstone is composed of quartz, muscovite, chert, and other rock fragments. Less than 15% of it is matrix. The environmental interpretation of the lithic sandstone is that it was deposited in deltaic areas, nearshore marine environments, or swamps and marshes. Now that we've taken a good hard look at sandstones, let's jump into carbonate rocks. Carbonate rocks and sediments are chemical or biochemical in origin. They can be limestones composed of either calcite or aragonite, both of these minerals being calcium carbonates, or they can be dolostones composed of the mineral dolomite, which is a calcium magnesium carbonate. Dolostones form in water that has less calcium, but it definitely has magnesium. And since calcium and magnesium are about the same size and they have similar chemical properties, they sort of substitute for one another. And if there is an incredible amount of magnesium, we get a dolomite. Most carbonate rocks form in shallow marine environments, but we can also find some in lakes, caves, and hot springs. Most limestones are the direct or indirect result of biological activity. The characteristics of most marine carbonate environments are the following. There's warm water, the water is shallow, it's a tropical climate, the water is generally very clear, and sunlight is required for photosynthesis by the algae. Lime mud often forms from the disintegration of calcareous algae. That's algae with calcium carbonate in their exoskeletons. When those little algae critters die, their skeletons disintegrate in the water, producing an aragonite mud. This lime mud will lithify to form a fine-grained limestone. Here's a cool type of carbonate sediment. They're called ooids. Now, ooids are tiny spheres composed of concentrically laminated calcium carbonate, like you see in this picture here. These ooids form in warm, shallow water with constant wave agitation. So what's the origin of all these carbonate sediments? Well, as you know, there are some microscopic organisms whose exoskeletons are made of calcium carbonate. Also, there are invertebrate organism shells, larger ones, that get abraded, weathered, worn, and those carbonate sediments become part of the ocean floor. There's also carbonate fecal pellets, and there is the precipitation of calcium carbonate from seawater as a result of biological activity. Some of these tiny organisms have specialized cells that take in the calcium and the carbonate to produce their exoskeletons. Now let's look at clays. Now, when you think of clay, maybe you just think of Play-Doh or something like that, or what you use in a pottery class. But the word clay in geology has two different definitions. One of them is it's a grain size term. Okay, so it's the size of a sedimentary particle. The other definition it is that it is a layered silicate mineral which behaves plastically when wet and hardens upon drying or firing, which is why we can use clays in creating pots. If you were in Geology 101, you remember kaolinite. That's the clay mineral that typical 101 students tend to look at. Well, there are some other ones as well. The smectites, the illites. Smectites contain magnesium, calcium, and or sodium ions, and they will swell when wet. Then there are the illites, and these are the major clay minerals in ancient shales. Clays are so small. It's a very small grain size. So clays tend to remain suspended in the water column and will only settle out in very still, quiet water, and if they're given enough time. Clays and shales typically indicate very low energy environments that are sheltered from waves and currents, because if there are waves and currents, those small clasts are going to be moving around in the water column. They're often found in lacustrine environments, lagoons, and deeper water marine deposits. If we were going out in the field, I would definitely have you look at these clay stones and shales and see if you can differentiate between them. Notice how a clay stone is very fine grained rock composed of clay minerals, mica, and quartz grains. And the grains are very small, too small to see with the unaided eye or even a hand lens. Clay stone feels very smooth to the touch, and it is not fissile. It breaks irregularly. Now, fissile means that the rock will split into relatively thin, flat layers. That's a shale. A shale is a fine-grained rock composed of clay, mud, and silt. And the shale is fissile. Remember, it splits readily into thin layers, but the clay stone won't. It's not fissile. The clay stone will break irregularly. Sadly, we're not going into the field this spring, but maybe when you're on your own and in other classes, you can take a look at the claystones and the shales and remember when you learned about it.